The sky above Zivath Prime burned red with the fires of a dying world. Queen Lyranthe stood on the observation deck of her command ship, watching her beautiful planet crumble beneath the endless assault of the Korgoth swarm. Her hands pressed against the viewing window, her crystalline skin reflecting the glow of explosions below. Each flash of light meant another city destroyed, another million of her people dead. She had ruled for 300 years. In that time, the Zevathari Empire had known nothing but peace and prosperity. Her people were artists, philosophers, scientists. They built towers that reached into the clouds and created art that could make other species weep with joy. War was something they studied in ancient history, not something they lived. But the Korgoth didn't care about art or beauty. They only cared about consumption. Your Majesty, the southern continent has fallen. The voice belonged to General Kirvan, her most trusted military commander. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and defeat. We lost another 2 battle groups trying to hold the capital city. The Korgoth broke through our shields like they were nothing. Lyranthe turned to face him. Her command center was filled with officers and advisors, all of them looking to her for answers she didn't have. The walls showed tactical displays with red markers spreading across every continent like a disease. Each red marker was a Korgoth hive cluster, and there were hundreds of them. How long until they reached the northern evacuation zones? She asked. 48 hours at most, Kirvan replied. Maybe less if they push harder. 48 hours. She had 48 hours to save whatever remained of her civilization. Millions had already died. Millions more were crowded into spaceports and refugee camps, desperate to escape. But there weren't enough ships. There would never be enough ships. Send another broadcast to the Allied Council, Lyranthe ordered. Tell them we need immediate military assistance. Any species, any fleet, anything they can spare. One of her communication officers looked up from his station. Your Majesty, we've sent 17 requests already. The responses have all been the same. I know, Lyranthe said quietly. Send it anyway. She knew what the responses would say. Sympathies, regrets, promises to accept Zevathari refugees. But no military aid. The other species had seen what the Korgoth did to civilizations that stood against them. 17 species had already been consumed, their worlds stripped bare. Their people turned into protein for the swarm. No one wanted to be number 18. The Zevathari were alone. Lyranthe walked back to the viewing window. Below, she could see the continent where she had been born, where she had played as a child in gardens filled with singing crystals. Now those gardens were ash. The palace where she had learned to rule was rubble. Everything she had known was being destroyed by creatures that moved like a single massive organism, coordinated by a hive intelligence that humanity couldn't even begin to understand. Your Majesty, we're receiving a response to the broadcast, the communications officer called out. Let me guess, Kirvan said bitterly, more regrets and sympathies. Actually, sir, this one is different. It's from Earth. They're sending a delegation. The room went silent. Earth. The humans. Most species in the galaxy barely knew they existed. They were new to space travel, having only developed faster-than-light technology 50 years ago. They were primitive by galactic standards, still using chemical rockets and metal ships when most civilizations had moved on to energy-based technology centuries ago. Humans? Kirvan shook his head. What can they possibly do to help? They don't even have proper military shields. They offered to help evacuate refugees, the officer explained. They're sending 3 cargo ships and a security team. It wasn't much. It wouldn't change the war, but at least someone was willing to come. At least someone cared enough to try. Accept their offer, Lyranthe said, and prepare the northern spaceport for increased evacuation operations. Every ship we can fill is another 1,000 lives saved. The human ships arrived 12 hours later. They were ugly things compared to Zevathari vessels, where Zevathari ships were smooth curves of crystal and light. Human ships were angular blocks of metal covered in armor plating and weapons. They looked like they were built for fighting rather than flying. Jake Murphy stood on the loading ramp of one of the human cargo ships, watching the chaos of the evacuation. He had seen war zones before during his time in the Earth military, but nothing like this. Millions of crystal-skinned aliens pushed and shoved toward the spaceports, carrying whatever possessions they could manage. Children cried. Families were separated in the crowds, and overhead the red sky flickered with distant explosions. This is bad, Amy Collins said beside him. She was the team medic, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. How many people are we supposed to evacuate? As many as we can fit, Jake replied. He was a tall man with short dark hair, and the kind of weathered face that came from seeing too much combat. He had left the military 5 years ago to work as a civilian security contractor, but old habits died hard. He still carried himself like a soldier. Greg Santos, their pilot, joined them on the ramp. We've got maybe 12 hours before the Korgath reach this sector. After that, we need to be in the air or we're dead. Then we'd better get moving, Jake said. They spent the next 10 hours loading refugees onto their ships. The Zevathari were polite even in their panic, thanking the humans in their melodic language. Jake didn't speak their language, but he understood the gratitude in their voices. These were people who had lost everything and were grateful for any kindness. The spaceport was in the capital city, a massive urban center built from crystal towers that caught the light and made it dance. Or at least it had been. Now half the towers were collapsed and smoke rose from fires burning across the city. Zevathari soldiers stood guard at the spaceport perimeter, their energy weapons ready, but they looked exhausted and defeated. Jake was helping an elderly Zevathari woman onto the ship when the alarm started blaring. The sound was high-pitched and urgent, cutting through the noise of the crowd. People started screaming and running in all directions. What's happening? Amy shouted. A Zevathari soldier ran past them, his weapon raised. Korgath strike team. They've broken through the perimeter. Jake's military training kicked in immediately. He turned to Greg. Get these people loaded and prep the ship for immediate takeoff. Amy, stay with him and help. What are you going to do? Amy demanded. What I'm trained to do, Jake replied. He pulled his rifle from his back and checked the magazine. It was a standard human combat rifle, nothing fancy. It fired solid metal bullets instead of energy beams. Most species in the galaxy thought kinetic weapons were primitive and outdated. Jake ran toward the sound of weapons fire. The main plaza was just ahead, and he could hear the distinctive buzz of Zevathari energy weapons mixed with a horrible clicking, chittering sound that made his skin crawl. When he reached the plaza, he saw them, the Korgath. They were nightmare creatures, each one standing 8 feet tall on multiple segmented legs. Their bodies were covered in biometallic armor that seemed to shift and adapt in the light. They had multiple arms ending in claws and blade-like appendages, but worst of all were their heads, filled with too many eyes and mandibles that clicked together as they moved. There were at least 20 of them in the plaza, cutting through a group of Zevathari civilians trying to reach the spaceport. A small group of Zevathari soldiers stood between the civilians and the Korgath, firing their energy weapons. The blue beams hit the Korgath armor and scattered harmlessly. The creatures didn't even slow down. In the center of the plaza, Jake saw her, Queen Lyranthe. She stood surrounded by her royal guard, maybe 10 soldiers in ornate armor. They formed a protective circle around her, firing their weapons desperately. But the Korgath were closing in fast. Everyone else was running away from the battle. Jake ran toward it. He raised his rifle and fired a 3-round burst at the nearest Korgath. The bullet struck the creature's armored shell with loud cracks. The Korgath stumbled and let out a shrieking sound. Green fluid leaked from the bullet holes. Every Korgath in the plaza turned to look at Jake. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then the creatures let out a chorus of clicking sounds and several of them charged toward him. Jake kept firing. Each burst found its target and each hit seemed to actually hurt the creatures. They stumbled, they screeched, and a few of them fell. Behind him, he heard running footsteps. Amy and Greg had followed him, both carrying rifles. I thought I told you to stay with the ship, Jake shouted. Yeah, well, we don't take orders well, Greg replied, opening fire. The 3 humans stood their ground, creating a wall of gunfire between the Korgath and the civilians. The Korgath that had been seconds away from overwhelming the Queen's Guard suddenly found themselves under attack from a direction they hadn't expected. More importantly, they found themselves being hurt by weapons they had no defense against. The Korgath had evolved over centuries of warfare. They had adapted to energy weapons, plasma cannons, antimatter bombs, and every other advanced weapon in the galaxy. Their armor could disperse energy, redirect heat, and absorb radiation. But they had never encountered humans before. They had never encountered simple kinetic weapons that... The evacuation continued for another 6 hours before the Korgath advance forced them to abandon Zavath Prime completely. Jake watched from the viewport of his cargo ship as the planet shrank behind them, its surface covered in the spreading red glow of Korgath hive clusters. Thousands of ships fled alongside them, carrying the survivors of a once great civilization. Inside the cargo hold, hundreds of Zevathari refugees sat in silence. Some were crying quietly. Others stared at nothing, their crystalline faces blank with shock. They had lost their homes, their world, everything they had ever known. Jake had seen that look before on the faces of war refugees back on Earth. Loss was loss, no matter what species you were. Amy moved through the refugees, providing medical care to those who needed it. She had a talent for staying calm in chaos, and her presence seemed to comfort the scared aliens around her. Greg was in the cockpit, keeping the ship in formation with the rest of the evacuation fleet. Jake sat alone near the loading ramp, cleaning his rifle. The weapon had saved lives today, but he knew it was just a temporary victory. The Korgath swarm stretched across dozens of star systems. They had consumed 17 civilizations already. What could Earth possibly do against that? His communicator buzzed. "Murphy, this is the Queen's command ship. Her Majesty requests your presence immediately." Jake looked down at his dirty combat gear. "Tell her I'm not exactly presentable for a royal meeting." She said immediately, "Murphy, she doesn't care what you're wearing." 20 minutes later, Jake was standing in the command center of the largest Zevathari ship in the fleet. The room was enormous, with walls that seemed to be made of living crystal. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing the positions of every ship in the refugee fleet. Hundreds of Zevathari officers worked at stations around the room, coordinating the evacuation. Queen Lyranthe stood at the center of it all, studying a tactical display that showed Korgath positions across 3 star systems. She looked up when Jake entered and waved him over. "Jake Murphy," she said. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Your Majesty." Jake gave an awkward attempt at a bow. He wasn't sure how you were supposed to greet an alien queen. Lyranthe smiled slightly. "You don't need to bow. You saved my life. That gives you the right to stand as an equal in my presence." She gestured to the display. "I've spent the last several hours reviewing the battle in the plaza. I've watched the recordings from multiple angles. Your weapons did something our weapons could not. They hurt the Korgath." "Yes, Your Majesty. I need to understand why." She pulled up a holographic image of a Korgath warrior. "These creatures have adaptive armor. It can disperse energy, redirect heat, and absorb radiation. Energy weapons are useless against them. Plasma weapons barely scratch them. Even antimatter requires direct hits to do significant damage. But your primitive projectile weapons cut through their armor like it wasn't there." "Why?" Jake stepped closer to the display. "Because they've never adapted to kinetic weapons. Most species in the galaxy moved away from ballistic weapons centuries ago, right? You all use energy-based technology now. The Korgath have had hundreds of years to evolve defenses against those weapons, but they've never faced humans before." "They've never faced bullets," Lyranthe nodded slowly. "Their armor is designed to disperse and absorb energy. But solid projectiles are just mass and velocity. There's nothing to disperse." "Exactly," Jake said. "A bullet is simple. It's just a piece of metal moving very fast. Their armor can't adapt to that the same way it adapts to energy." General Kirvan, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. "But surely they will adapt eventually. The Korgath learn quickly. Once they understand the threat, they will evolve new defenses." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But that takes time. And while they're adapting to bullets, we can switch to explosives. While they're adapting to explosives, we can use chemical weapons. Humans never stopped developing these technologies. We kept them all, even the old ones." Lyranthe was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline fingers drumming against the console. "I've already sent a message to your government. I requested military assistance from Earth. Will they help us?" Jake thought about that. Earth was still new to the galactic community. The human government was cautious about getting involved in alien conflicts. But the Korgath were different. They were a threat to everyone, including humanity. "I don't know, Your Majesty," he said honestly, "but if I were making the decision, I'd say yes. The Korgath won't stop with the Zevathari. Eventually they'll reach Earth. Better to fight them now while you have allies." "That's what I'm hoping your leaders will understand," Lyranthe said. She turned to face him directly. "Jake Murphy, I have a request. Stay with my fleet. Help us understand how humans fight. If Earth sends military aid, I want you to be my advisor, someone who can help bridge the gap between our peoples." Jake hesitated. He had signed up to evacuate refugees, not to fight a war. But he remembered the faces of the Zevathari civilians in the plaza, scared and helpless. He remembered the children crying as their world burned. "I'll stay," he said, "as long as you need me." The response from Earth came 3 days later. Jake was in a small room that had been assigned to him on the Queen's ship when the message came through. He pulled up the communication on his terminal and saw Ambassador Lisa Chen's face appear. "Jake, I hope you're safe," Lisa said. She was a serious woman in her 50s, who had been Earth's primary representative to the galactic community for the past decade. "Your report about the Korgoth vulnerability to kinetic weapons has caused quite a stir back home. The military is very interested. Are we sending help?" Jake asked. "Yes," Lisa said, "but not an army, not yet. We're sending military advisors, weapons specialists, and training personnel. The president wants to see if your theory is correct before committing to a full military engagement. If kinetic weapons really are effective against the Korgoth, we'll provide whatever support we can." Jake felt relief wash over him. It wasn't everything the Zevethari needed, but it was a start. "Who's coming?" he asked. "Lieutenant Danny Price will be leading a Marine company. Captain Nicole Bennett will bring tactical advisors. Commander Ryan Walsh will coordinate any naval support we provide. They'll arrive in your location within 5 days. That's fast." "The Korgoth are moving faster," Lisa replied. "Intelligence shows they're expanding toward 3 more inhabited systems. If they're not stopped, we're looking at millions more deaths within the month." She paused. "Jake, I need you to make this work. Earth is taking a risk helping the Zevethari. Make sure it's worth it." The communication ended, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. 5 days until help arrived. He hoped it would be enough. Those 5 days were busy. Jake spent most of his time with Queen Lyranthe and her military commanders, explaining human combat tactics and strategies. The Zevethari were brilliant scientists and philosophers, but they thought about war differently than humans did. "You're too honorable," Jake told them during one strategy session. A dozen Zevethari officers sat around a conference table, looking at him with confusion. "Honorable?" General Kirvan frowned. "How is that a weakness? You announce your attacks. You give warnings before striking. You fight in organized formations and follow rules of engagement." Jake shook his head. "The Korgoth don't care about any of that. They fight to consume and survive. You can't beat them by being fair." "What are you suggesting?" Lyranthe asked. "Ambushes, surprise attacks, hit-and-run tactics. Use terrain to your advantage. Set traps, fight dirty." Jake pulled up a tactical display. "Humans learned a long time ago that sometimes you have to abandon honor to survive. We call it asymmetric warfare. When the enemy is stronger than you don't fight them on their terms. You fight them on yours." The Zevethari officers looked uncomfortable. One of them, a female commander named Vexthal, spoke up. "These tactics you describe sound like assassination, not warfare." "They're survival tactics," Jake replied. "And right now survival is all that matters. You can rebuild your honor after you win. You can't rebuild anything if you're extinct." Lyranthe studied the tactical display. "Show us," she said quietly. "Show us how humans would fight this war." Jake spent the next several days teaching them. He showed them how to use cover and concealment. He explained the concept of suppressing fire, where you shoot not to kill but to keep the enemy pinned down. He taught them about fields of fire, kill zones, and crossfire patterns. He introduced them to the idea of explosive booby traps and delayed fuses. The Zevethari were quick learners. Once they got past their discomfort with dishonorable tactics, they began to see the advantages. Commander Vexthal was especially interested. She spent hours asking Jake questions about guerrilla warfare and special operations. "On Earth we have a saying," Jake told her. "If you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics are bad. The goal isn't to fight fair. The goal is to win with as few casualties as possible. Your species has a harsh view of warfare," Vexthal observed. "We've had a lot of practice," Jake replied. When the human military ships finally arrived, Jake was there to meet them. The ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in formation, their angular metal hulls looking crude compared to the elegant Zevethari. The training started the next morning in one of the larger cargo bays that had been converted into a makeshift firing range. Jake stood with Lieutenant Danny Price, watching as 50 Zevethari soldiers filed in, wearing their traditional crystal armor. They moved with grace and precision, every movement practiced and perfect. They looked like they were preparing for a ceremony, not a war. "This is going to be interesting," Danny muttered. The Zevethari soldiers lined up in perfect formation, standing at attention. Their commander, Vexthal, stepped forward and gave a formal salute. "We are ready for instruction." Danny walked down the line, looking at each soldier. "You know why you're here?" To learn to use human weapons, Vexthal replied. Wrong, Danny said. You're here to forget everything you know about warfare and learn to fight like humans. He gestured to Jake. Murphy here tells me you people fight with honor. You follow rules. You give warnings. Is that true? The Zevathari soldiers looked confused. Vexthal nodded slowly. Yes. That is how civilized species conduct warfare. Well, here's the first lesson, Danny said. The Korgath aren't civilized. They don't follow rules. They don't care about honor, so we're going to teach you to fight without honor, without rules and without mercy. Anyone have a problem with that? The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a young male, spoke up. That sounds like what savages do. Good, Danny replied. Because right now you need to be savages. Polite civilized warriors are dead warriors. Savages survive. He picked up a rifle from a nearby table. This is a human combat rifle. It fires metal projectiles at high velocity. It's loud, it's crude, and it will punch holes in Korgath armor. Who wants to try it first? The training was difficult for the Zevathari. They were used to energy weapons that fired silently and precisely. Human ballistic weapons were loud, had recoil, and required different aiming techniques. The first few hours were filled with missed shots and frustrated soldiers, but they learned. Slowly but surely, they adapted. Jake worked with a smaller group teaching them about explosives. He showed them how to make improvised bombs using common materials. He taught them about shaped charges, directional mines, and remote detonators. The Zevathari were shocked by how much destructive power could be created with simple chemistry. Your species really loves explosions, one soldier observed. We appreciate their efficiency, Jake replied with a slight smile. An explosion doesn't care if your enemy has shields or armor. It just destroys everything in the blast radius. Captain Nicole Bennett ran tactical training sessions, teaching the Zevathari about ambush positions, cover and concealment, and small unit tactics. She was a patient teacher, but she didn't hold back criticism when the soldiers fell back into their old habits. Stop standing in the open, she shouted during one exercise. You're not on a parade ground. You're supposed to be hiding. Use the terrain. Make yourself a hard target. Commander Ryan Walsh worked with the Zevathari naval officers, teaching them about human ship combat tactics. Zevathari space battles were elegant affairs with ships maneuvering in formation and exchanging fire at long range. Human naval combat was more aggressive, with ships using their speed and maneuverability to close distance and overwhelm the enemy. We call it knife fighting, Ryan explained to a group of Zevathari captains. Get in close, hit hard, get out fast. Don't give them time to adapt. Queen Lyranthe observed everything. She moved from training session to training session, watching her soldiers learn these new and brutal techniques. Jake could see the conflict in her crystalline features. She was asking her people to abandon centuries of tradition and culture to become something they weren't. But she also understood it was necessary. One evening, she found Jake in the armory, cataloging weapons and ammunition. She stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. Is this what humanity is? She asked quietly. Violence and destruction? Jake looked up from his work. It's part of what we are, but not all of it. How did your people become so good at war? Jake set down the rifle he was cleaning and leaned against the table. Because we had to be. Earth isn't a peaceful place, Your Majesty. We have hundreds of different nations, cultures, and beliefs. For most of our history, we've been fighting each other. We got very good at it because the alternative was extinction. That sounds like a terrible way to live. It was, Jake agreed. Still is sometimes. But it taught us how to survive. And now we're going to teach you. Lyranthe was quiet for a moment. Do you think my people can become warriors like yours? I think your people can become whatever they need to be to survive, Jake said. You're intelligent, adaptable, and brave. You just need to channel those qualities in a different direction. A darker direction, Lyranthe observed. A necessary one, Jake corrected. War isn't pretty, Your Majesty. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to keep you and your people alive. After 2 weeks of intensive training, Danny Price decided it was time for a field test. Intelligence reports had located a small Korgath outpost on a moon in a nearby system. It was a mining operation with maybe 300 Korgath workers and a dozen warriors guarding them. Small enough to be manageable, but large enough to be a real test. We're going to hit it, Danny announced during a briefing with the Zevathari command staff. 1 platoon of your soldiers with human advisors. Quick strike, plant explosives, destroy the facility, and get out. General Kirvan frowned. This sounds like a suicide mission. It sounds like the kind of mission humans do every day, Danny replied. And your people need to learn how to do them too. Commander Vexthal volunteered to lead the Zevathari strike team. She had taken to human tactics better than any other officer, and her soldiers trusted her. Jake would go with them as an advisor along with 3 other human Marines. They prepped for the mission carefully. The Zevathari soldiers wore darker armor and carried human weapons alongside their own energy weapons. They practiced moving quietly, something that didn't come naturally to a species that valued grace over stealth. They reviewed the plan dozens of times until everyone knew their role. The night before the mission, Jake found Vexthal checking her equipment. She looked up when he approached. Nervous? Jake asked. Terrified, Vexthal admitted. I've fought the Korgath before. I've seen what they do to soldiers who make mistakes. But those battles were different. We had overwhelming numbers and superior position. This mission has us going into their territory with a small force. That's the whole point, Jake said. Small force means you're harder to detect. You get in, do the damage, and get out before they know what hit them. And if they detect us anyway, then you fight your way out. Jake checked his own rifle. Vexthal, you've spent 2 weeks learning how to do this. Trust your training. Trust your team. And most importantly, trust yourself. Vexthal's crystalline features reflected the dim lights of the armory. My people aren't warriors, Jake. We're artists and builders. What if we can't do this? Then you'll die, Jake said bluntly. But I don't think that's going to happen. I've watched you train. You're good at this. Better than a lot of human soldiers I've seen. They launched the mission at midnight ship time. A small stealth shuttle carried the strike team toward the moon where the Korgath had set up their mining operation. Jake sat in the back with the Zevathari soldiers, all of them silent and focused. The moon was a barren rock with no atmosphere. The Korgath mining facility was built into a crater, with multiple tunnels leading underground. Thermal scans showed about 300 heat signatures, mostly clustered in the deep mines. The warrior drones patrolled the surface. The shuttle landed 2 kilometers from the facility. The strike team moved out on foot, using the rough terrain for cover. Jake led the way with Vexthal beside him. Behind them, 30 Zevathari soldiers moved quietly through the darkness. They reached the facility perimeter without being detected. Jake signaled for the team to spread out into their assault positions. Half the team would create a distraction on the east side while the other half planted explosives in the main tunnel system. Remember, Jake whispered into his communicator, quick and quiet until the explosives are set. Then you can be loud. The assault team moved into position. Jake watched through his scope as 3 Korgath warriors patrolled the eastern perimeter. He counted down silently. 3, 2, 1. The Zevathari soldiers opened fire. The sound of gunfire shattered the silence. The Korgath warriors stumbled as bullets tore through their armor. They screeched and tried to return fire, but more bullets cut them down. Go, 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 Vexthal ordered. She led her team toward the main tunnel entrance while the Korgath were distracted. Jake covered their advance, his rifle picking off any Korgath that emerged from the tunnels. The facility's alarms were blaring now. More warriors were coming. The assault team did their job, keeping the enemy focused on them while Vexthal's demolition team worked. Inside the tunnels, Vexthal and her soldiers moved fast. They planted explosive charges at key structural points, setting them on remote detonators. The Korgath miners scattered at their approach, and the few warriors they encountered were quickly gunned down. Charges set, Vexthal reported, moving to extraction point. Copy that, Jake replied. Assault team, fall back. The victory at Karath 4 changed everything. News of the liberation spread across the galaxy within days. Other species that had been too afraid to help the Zevathari suddenly found their courage. Weapons shipments arrived from multiple civilizations. Volunteers came to join the fight. The alliance against the Korgath grew stronger every day, but Queen Lyranthe had her eyes on a bigger prize. She stood in her war room staring at the holographic display of Zeveth Prime, her homeworld, the heart of her empire. The Korgath had held it for over 2 years now, turning its beautiful cities into hive clusters and processing centers. Jake entered the room and found her there, as he often did these days. She barely slept anymore, spending every moment planning and strategizing. You're thinking about going home, Jake said. It wasn't a question. Always. Lyranthi replied without looking away from the display. Every day I think about my world. My people who couldn't escape. The children growing up in refugee camps who have never seen their homeworld. We can take it back, Jake said. But it won't be easy. Zeveth Prime is the Korgath's main stronghold in this sector. They've had 2 years to fortify it. It'll make Kareth 4 look like a training exercise. I know, Lyranthi said. But it's time. We've proven we can win battles. Now we need to prove we can win the war. She finally turned to look at him. Will Earth support this operation? I can't speak for my government, Jake said. But I can speak for the soldiers here. We're with you, all the way to the end. The planning for Operation Homecoming took 3 months. Every ship in the Alliance fleet would participate. Over 100 vessels from a dozen different species carrying 15,000 soldiers. It would be the largest military operation in modern galactic history. Commander Ryan Walsh coordinated the naval strategy. We'll hit them in 3 waves. First wave draws their attention and engages their orbital defenses. Second wave provides cover for the ground assault. Third wave is our reserve, ready to respond to whatever surprises the Korgath have waiting. Captain Nicole Bennett laid out the ground assault plan. We're looking at 6 major landing zones spread across 3 continents. The goal is to spread their forces thin while we concentrate on key objectives. Primary target is the Hive Nexus in what used to be the capital city. If we destroy that, the Korgath lose coordination across the entire planet. Danny Price would lead the ground forces alongside Commander Vexthal. The Zevethari commander had become one of the most respected officers in the Alliance, known for her tactical brilliance and fierce determination. The Korgath won't give up Zeveth Prime easily, Danny said during one planning session. They'll throw everything they have at us. We need to be ready for a long fight. How long? General Kirvan asked. Days, maybe weeks. We'll have to hold the landing zones and slowly push inland. Every kilometer will be fought for. The weeks before the operation were intense. New weapons arrived from Earth, including heavy artillery and armored vehicles. More soldiers were trained. Supply lines were established. Everyone knew this would be the decisive battle of the war. Jake spent his time preparing the assault teams. He had become the unofficial bridge between human and Zevethari forces, someone both sides trusted and respected. He knew this battle would be his greatest test. Everything he had taught the Zevethari would be put to the ultimate challenge. 2 days before the operation, Amy found him in the armory. You know you don't have to go, right? You've done enough. You could coordinate from one of the ships. Can't do that, Jake said, checking his equipment. These soldiers have trained for this moment. They need to see that their instructors have faith in them. Besides, I want to be there when we take back their world. Ever the hero, Amy said, but she was smiling. Just a guy who can't walk away from a fight. The fleet assembled at the edge of the Zivath system. Over 100 ships representing the combined might of the Alliance. Queen Lyranthi broadcast a message to all forces. 2 years ago, I fled from the system in defeat. I watched my world burn and my people die. I thought we had lost everything. But you, all of you, showed me that defeat is only permanent if we accept it. Today we return home. Today we take back what was stolen. Today we show the Korgath that they made a mistake when they attacked the Zevethari and our allies. For freedom. For victory. For home. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed. They emerged from hyperspace above Zeveth Prime. The planet was unrecognizable. The beautiful blue and green world Jake had seen in recordings was now covered in gray and brown. Korgath structures sprawled across entire continents. The atmosphere was hazy with pollution from their processing plants, but it was still the Zevethari homeworld. And they were taking it back. All ships engage. Ryan Walsh's command echoed across the fleet. The first wave of ships surged forward, weapons blazing. Korgath orbital platforms returned fire. Space lit up with energy beams and kinetic rounds. Explosions bloomed like flowers of fire. Jake watched from the assault transport as the battle raged around them. The second wave moved in, providing cover for the dropships. Hundreds of small craft descended toward the planet carrying the invasion force. Entering atmosphere, the pilot announced. Hold on, this is going to be rough. The dropship shook violently as it punched through the clouds. Anti-air fire from the surface reached up toward them. Jake saw one dropship get hit and spiral down in flames. The sight made his stomach clench, but there was no time to mourn. 30 seconds to landing. They came down in what had once been a public park in the capital city. Now it was a barren field surrounded by Korgath structures. The moment the ramp dropped, Jake and his team poured out into cover. Korgath warriors were already charging their position. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, but the Alliance forces were ready. Defensive positions had been established in seconds. Heavy weapons opened up, cutting down the attackers in waves. "Push forward," Vexthal ordered. "We need to secure the landing zone." The battle was chaos. Gunfire, explosions, screaming, the terrible chittering of the Korgath. Jake fired his rifle in controlled bursts, dropping enemies as they appeared. Beside him, Zevathari soldiers fought with a fury born from fighting for their homeworld. They weren't just trained warriors anymore. They were people defending their home. The landing zone was secured within an hour, but at a cost. Bodies littered the field, both Alliance and Korgath. Medics rushed to help the wounded. More dropships descended, bringing reinforcements and supplies. "All landing zones report successful insertion," came the report from command. Beginning Phase 2, all units advanced to primary objectives. Jake's team was assigned to push toward the old city center where the Hive Nexus was located. They moved through streets that had once been beautiful boulevards but were now filled with alien structures and organic growths. Every building had to be cleared. Every corner could hide enemies. The fighting was street to street, building to building. The Korgath defended every meter, but the Alliance forces had superior tactics and better weapons. Slowly, they pushed forward. Days blurred together. Sleep was grabbed in short bursts between battles. Meals were eaten cold from ration packs. The only constant was the fighting. But the Alliance kept advancing. Landing zones expanded. Supply lines were established. Reinforcements arrived from orbit. On the fourth day, they reached the Hive Nexus. It was a massive structure in the heart of the old capital. Built from Korgath biomaterials and captured Zevathari technology, it pulsed with an eerie organic light. This was the brain that coordinated all Korgath forces on the planet. "That's our target," Vexthal said, studying the structure through binoculars. "The intelligence says there are hundreds of warriors inside, plus the Nexus organism itself." "Then we go in with everything we have," Jake said. He activated his communicator. "All assault teams converge on the Nexus. This is it. One final push." They attacked at dawn. Artillery pounded the structure while fighter craft strafed it with rockets. Then the ground forces moved in. Jake led one assault team through a breach in the outer wall. Inside, the structure was like a nightmare. Organic walls pulsed with light. Strange sounds echoed from everywhere, and Korgath warriors were waiting. The battle inside the Nexus was the most intense fighting Jake had ever experienced. Korgath defenders attacked from every direction. The corridors were narrow and dark, perfect for ambushes, but the Alliance soldiers fought with desperate determination. They had come too far to fail now. Jake's team fought their way to the central chamber. There they found the Nexus organism itself. It was enormous, a mass of neural tissue and biotechnology that filled the entire room. Tendrils connected it to walls covered in alien computing systems. "Plant the charges," Jake ordered. Engineers rushed forward with high explosive charges. They placed them at key points around the chamber while soldiers held off the defending Korgath. "Charges set," one engineer called out. "Everyone out. Move, move, move." The teams retreated through the structure, fighting their way back to the exit. Behind them, Korgath warriors pursued frantically as if they knew what was about to happen. Jake was the last one out. He turned and looked back at the structure one final time. Then he triggered the detonator. The explosion was massive. The entire Hive Nexus collapsed in on itself. 6 months had passed since the first successful strike mission. The refugee fleet had grown larger as more Zevathari escaped from Korgath-occupied worlds. But something else had grown too. An army. Jake stood in the training bay of a converted cargo ship, watching hundreds of Zevathari soldiers practice with human weapons. They moved with confidence now. Nothing like the uncertain warriors he had first met. Commander Vexthal walked among them, correcting stances and offering advice. She had become one of the best tactical officers in the fleet. "They're looking good," Danny said, joining Jake at the observation window. "They're ready," Jake agreed. "Better than ready." In 6 months, the war had changed dramatically. The Korgath still controlled most of the Zevathari territory, but they no longer advanced unchallenged. Strike teams hit their outposts weekly. Supply lines were disrupted. Mining operations were destroyed. The swarm was learning that holding territory came with a cost. More importantly, other species were starting to pay attention. When the Zevathari had been losing, everyone abandoned them. But now that they were fighting back successfully, allies were appearing. 3 other species had sent military advisors. Two had offered weapons and supplies. Earth had committed more ships and personnel. The alliance against the Korgath was growing. Queen Lyranthe wants to see you, Danny said. Something big is happening. Jake found the Queen in her war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing tactical data. She looked different than she had 6 months ago. The desperate fear was gone, replaced by focused determination. She had become a war leader. Jake, she said when she saw him, we have an opportunity. Look at this. She pulled up a star map showing Korgath positions. The enemy has been reorganizing their forces. They're pulling back from some of the outer systems to consolidate their hold on core territory. But in doing so, they've created a vulnerability. She highlighted one system, Kareth 4. It was one of our mining worlds. The Korgath captured it early in the war and have been using it to produce materials for their ships and weapons. Intelligence reports they've moved most of the warrior drones to other systems, leaving the facility lightly defended. Jake studied the display. You want to take it back? More than that, Lyranthe said. I want to make it a statement. For 6 months, we've been hitting small targets. Outposts, supply depots, minor facilities. The Korgath have learned to expect those attacks. But if we can retake an entire world, it will show them we're not just surviving. We're fighting to win. That's a big escalation, Jake said carefully. Taking and holding a planet is different from hit-and-run raids. You'll need a much larger force, and the Korgath will respond with everything they have. I know, Lyranthe replied. That's why I need your help planning it, and I need Earth's help executing it. Over the next week, they planned the operation. It would be the largest military action the Alliance had attempted. 50 ships would participate, carrying 5,000 Zevethari soldiers and 200 human marines. The goal was to land on Kareth 4, destroy the Korgath facilities, and establish a defensive perimeter that could hold until reinforcements arrived. It was ambitious. Maybe too ambitious. This could go very wrong, Commander Ryan Walsh said during one planning session. If the Korgath respond faster than we expect, our forces could be trapped on the surface. That's a risk we have to take, Lyranthe said firmly. We need a major victory, something that proves we can win this war. Jake looked at the tactical displays. The plan was solid, but Ryan was right. There were a lot of things that could go wrong. We'll need to make sure our extraction plan is bulletproof. If things go bad, we need to be able to pull everyone out quickly. Already working on it, Ryan said. We'll have the fleet in position to provide covering fire and emergency evac. Captain Nicole Bennett added, I recommend we send advance teams to scout the landing zones and identify any surprises. The last thing we need is to land in the middle of a trap. The planning continued for another week. Every detail was examined. Every contingency was prepared for. When they finally had a plan everyone could agree on, Lyranthe called a general assembly of all military personnel. Jake stood on the stage with the Queen, Danny, and other leaders. Thousands of Zevethari and human soldiers filled the assembly bay, waiting to hear what was coming. Lyranthe stepped forward to speak. Her voice was broadcast throughout the fleet. For 2 years we have been running. For 2 years we have watched our worlds burn and our people die. For 6 months we have been learning to fight back. We have hit the enemy where it hurts. We have shown them they are not invincible. Now it is time to take the next step. She activated a holographic display of Kareth 4. This was one of our worlds. The Korgath took it from us. In 3 days we are going to take it back. The room erupted in excited chatter. Lyranthe raised her hand for silence. This will not be easy. Many of you will be in danger. Some of you may not return. But this is necessary. We must show the Korgath that we are not victims. We are not refugees. We are warriors, and we will fight for every world they have stolen from us. She looked directly at the crowd. Are you with me? The response was deafening. Thousands of voices shouted their agreement. Jake felt the energy in the room and knew that these people were ready. They had been beaten down and broken, but they had rebuilt themselves into something stronger. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Weapons were distributed. Ships were loaded. Final training exercises were conducted. Jake barely slept, spending most of his time helping coordinate the logistics of the operation. On the eve of the attack, he found himself alone in his quarters, cleaning his rifle out of habit. There was a knock on the door. Amy Collins entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this, she said, handing him one. Thanks. Jake took a sip. It was terrible coffee, but it was familiar. Earth coffee, not the Zevethari equivalent. Amy sat down across from him. You think we can pull this off? Honestly, I don't know, Jake said. The plan is good. The soldiers are well trained, but we're still going up against an enemy that has destroyed 17 civilizations. That's not something you do if you're weak. But they can be hurt, Amy said. We've proven that. Hurting them and beating them are two different things. Jake set down his coffee. 6 months ago, we were just trying to give the Zevathari hope. Now we're trying to win a war. The stakes are a lot higher. Do you regret staying? Jake thought about that. He had signed up for a simple evacuation mission. He could have left months ago, but he was still here, preparing to lead soldiers into battle against an alien threat. No, he said finally. I don't regret it. These people needed help. We're the only ones who stepped up. Very human of you, Amy said with a slight smile. What does that mean? It means humans have a habit of getting involved in fights that aren't ours. We can't help it. We see someone who needs help and we jump in. She finished her coffee. That's why I'm still here too. Try to get some sleep, Jake. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The attack began at dawn, ship time. 50 vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel above Karath 4. The planet was a beautiful world with green continents and blue oceans, but the surface was scarred by Korgath mining operations. All ships, this is command. Lyranthi's voice came over the communication channel. Begin Operation Liberation. May fortune favor the bold. The first wave of dropships launched toward the surface. Jake was in one of them, surrounded by 30 Zevathari soldiers from Vexthal's unit. The commander herself sat across from him, her rifle held ready. Remember your training, Vexthal said to her soldiers. We go in fast, we hit hard, and we secure the landing zone. The second wave will land once we've cleared a safe area. The dropship shook as it entered the atmosphere. Through the viewports, Jake could see the Korgath facilities below. They were massive industrial complexes with hundreds of buildings and structures. Smoke rose from processing plants. Hive ships were docked at landing pads. 30 seconds to landing, the pilot announced. Jake checked his rifle one last time. Here we go. The dropship touched down in a cleared area 2 kilometers from the main Korgath facility. The rear ramp dropped and soldiers poured out, immediately fanning into defensive positions. Jake hit the ground running, scanning for threats. Korgath warriors were already responding. They came from the direction of the facility in groups, their chittering sounds carrying across the distance. But they were met with overwhelming firepower. Hundreds of rifles opened up and the advancing Korgath were cut down. Landing zone secure, Vexthal reported. Bring in the second wave. More dropships descended from the sky. Within an hour, 5,000 soldiers were on the ground. They formed into combat units and began advancing toward the Korgath facilities. The battle had begun. Jake led an assault team toward one of the processing plants. They moved from cover to cover, engaging any Korgath they encountered. The enemy fought back fiercely, but the Alliance forces had overwhelming numbers and superior tactics. Explosives team, move up, Jake ordered. A group of Zevathari engineers ran forward with demo charges. They placed the explosives at the base of the processing plant and set the timers. Everyone back. The explosion shook the ground. The entire building collapsed, sending